starting with the chapter 4, which is Entrenchment of Coloniality through European Political Structures. The author starts us by positing two reasonable conclusions from our discussions of the previous three chapters. Firstly, he talks about the Christian inspiration of European colonialism that started with the expedition of Columbus in 1492, which according to which the Christians viewed the non Christian New World from a dualist Cartesian perspective or a humanist prism, where the humans were supposed to be superior to that of the natives or the nature. And secondly, the impact that this dualist approach had on the entire cultural, socio-economic, political systems of the natives, which is to say that because of this approach, a sense of race consciousness, a sense of anthropological superiority, which is to say that humans are better than nature and other such thing started. And these two conclusions led to the detrimental effect to the native and because of these two situations, a lot of detrimental effects came about in the native society. Which brings us to Patrick Ziltiner, who was an individual, a scholar, who wrote about settler colonialism, which is to say that in those places where the colonial individuals found places to be habitable, or they felt that they could transfer there and live as the climate was something that they could adapt to, and it was basically a conducive environment for settlement. Settler colonialism came about. Now, in those places where there was settler colonialism, a lot of investment happened in the legal structure, in the political structure, and also in education, which deepened the roots and impact of the colonialism, especially the colonial lens, which also took toll after these countries get independent. Apart from settler colonialism, there was also a kind of exploitative colonialism wherein there was not direct settlement, but the investment was more focused on the process of rent seeking and taking out resources through forcing the local rulers and other such entities. Now, the author brings us to the recruitment of soldiers, which is to say that a lot of recruitment of soldiers also happened, if we take the example of Bharat, on caste basis, or martial races, which were thought to be warrior races, were taken up, and these soldiers were divided into various castes and religious lines, which again had a lot of significant impact, especially in the present day Bharat, because it perpetuated the caste based system and the caste based organization. Apart from this, a lot of in other places also where there was British Empire, like Burma, also organization of soldiers was based on the ethnic lines. Apart from this, the Dutch also organized their soldiers based on the ethnic lines. Even in the civil services, those individuals who converted to Christianity were given more preference and a lot of advantages. Apart from that, native elites were used as tools to basically further the agenda by giving them higher posts in the civil services at some instances. But even then, the Christian converts enjoyed a relatively better position. Which brings us to the political structure, which was made in such a way that the native elite subscribed to this idea that if the colonizers leave our country, we are so dependent on these colonizers and their structure that the country would become disarray and it would result in an anarchy all around. Hence, a dependence on colonizers was artificially created in the mind of these native elites, and this was further strengthened to the idea or the projection of cultural superiority, which is to say that the colonizers were more supreme, had better cultural roots, had better apparatus in the form of, let's say, legal principles, political apparatus, and other such thing. Now, in the mid 19th century onwards, this Christian backing of the whole colonialism enterprise was forgotten, and the idea of Christianity became more and more secularized, which is to say it started to adapt to these changing ideas. Now its unsecular origins was forgotten, and an idea of independent nation state modeled on the European lines was thought to be the right approach for the decolonial future. Now, one might ask that if it became secularized, why is there an issue? To which the author tells us that because it has a theological foundation, without understanding that theological foundation, considering that now these cultures have completely lost their own identity and they are being forced to ascribe to a foreign idea, they have to understand the theological foundations of that idea before choosing to subscribe to it or not. In this regard, Dr. Jacob D. Rover is a scholar which the author has relied on extensively, and it has and according to his analysis, he states that the source of a particular ideology is important, and in this context, the history of secularism, which has Christian origins, is important to understand its ramification. This basically implies that there was no informed consent that happened in the societies. Rather, they were, or the culture, or the countries, they were rather forced to ascribe to the idea of secularism, even if they did not want to do that. And their agency or choice, if a particular country feels that they should not apply this idea and because of its foreign theological inspiration and other such things, was completely forgotten. This agency and the right was not given to them, which the author states is completely important, because a society has a right to prior informed consent before the imposition of an alien principle. Now, also, if we state that the worldview of the colonial empire had a theological framework, and these countries are being forced to follow a foreign theological framework, and it was the basis through which the secular idea came about, then this has to be understood rather than secularizing and universalizing these principles, because this was the very object of coloniality, to create a homogenized society on the lines of the colonial enterprise. And thus the ramifications of the secularization of the people and the homogenization of people and the theological framework from which it gains its backing is something that has to be understood.